Good evening, everyone. Everybody hear me? My name is Paul Roser. I'm the director of the Lepage Center for History and Public Interest and a member of the faculty at the Villanova Department of History. Oh, I'm not very good with numbers. Okay. Welcome to the final event of the Lepage Center's academic calendar and the final event of a year-long series on cities and historical perspective. We have talked about Odessa, Ukraine. We've had sessions on immigration in American cities, Houston, Chicago. We've talked about India and other parts of the world, and I'm just glad that we can bring it all back to the local and bring it back to Philadelphia and do it in person and not do it on Zoom, although I do welcome those people who are watching with the live stream. Special welcome to our distinguished panelists and to our moderator, Dr. Andy Liu. At any time, if you feel inspired, help yourself to some snacks and some water. I'm going to introduce Andy, and then he's going to introduce the panelists. And then we'll have plenty of time after they speak to ask some questions. So briefly, Dr. Liu graduated from Columbia University with a PhD in history, joined the Villanova faculty, where he teaches courses on history of China and global capitalism. His book, Tea Wars, won a book prize from the Business History Conference. And I'm grateful for his work in organizing this event and the work of Kevin Fox, our center administrator. So please give it up for Andy Liu.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I want to begin with my own set of thank yous. Thanks first and foremost to support from the Villanova's Lepage Center, the director, my colleague, Professor Paul Roser, the center administrator, Kevin Fox, who was instrumental in helping put this together. A huge thanks to the Asian Arts Initiative for going above and beyond helping putting this event together, especially Dave, Q, Devin McKnight, Samantha Quinn, and Ishii, and the whole organization. And of course, thanks to everyone for coming and watching on the live stream and so on. So the thinking for this panel was this, that I think most people know, in June 2022, the Philadelphia 76ers announced a proposal to build an arena at roughly 10th and Market, where the fashion district is today. Since then, a lot has been said, a lot has been written about the arena. The thought process for this panel was that if we tackle this controversy from a historical perspective, from a comparative perspective, then hopefully that could maybe sharpen our understanding of the current moment, of the current controversy. So hopefully that's like value added to the current conversation. So in other words, I think a lot of presentations will be kind of heavy on the history side, but hopefully by the time of Q&A, and hopefully we have plenty of time for Q&A, we can have an open conversation about past, the present, and future of Chinatown and Philadelphia as well. Really quickly, the biographies of our panelists. I won't go, very detailed, as detailed as Paul, but you can see the longer biographies on the screen. So first speaking will be Domenic Vitiello, a prize-winning urban historian and planner, associate professor of city planning and urban studies at Penn, and he will be talking about Philly's Chinatown in a broader comparative historical perspective. Second is Mary Yee, a pioneering activist and educator in Philadelphia's Asian American community for 40 years, and she'll be talking about the history of activism and politics in Philadelphia's Chinatown and kind of contextualizing the Sixers arena in that. And finally is Inga Saffron, a journalist and award-winning architecture critic with the Philadelphia Inquirer, and she will talk about the history of Market Street and the relationship between Market Street, Philadelphia more broadly, and Market Street and Chinatown. First, I wanted to begin very briefly by kind of establishing a sort of baseline knowledge for the room, in the sense of many of you probably know the history of Philadelphia's Chinatown, but many of you are probably like me. I'm an outsider, and until about 2 weeks ago, or about last night, I didn't really know very much about the history of Philadelphia's Chinatown, so I thought it would be useful to kind of begin by establishing some basic dates and facts. But of course, our panelists could be much more in-depth on some of these questions. Basically, Philadelphia's Chinatown is established in the 1870s, more or less, and it's the 900 block, 900 Grace Street. As you can see on the map here, from the excellent book from Catherine Wilson, it was that gray shaded area there, and that red star is where we are today. And this map, tells us the changing boundaries, the expansive boundaries of Chinatown over the years, and it's pretty remarkable, right, that the 900 block of Grace Street has basically been continuous from the 1870s to the present as the core of Chinatown. Philadelphia's Chinese diaspora in the 19th century broadly reflected sort of national trends, global trends of migration, restriction, and exclusion around the world for Asian populations. A lot of the residents were probably sojourning working-class men from southern China, and up through about World War II, there was only a couple hundred living in this neighborhood. Right? And it looked something like this. Things begin to change after World War II, as they do for much of the country, where you have new waves of immigrants coming from Taiwan, from Hong Kong, but also Cambodia, Vietnam, Indonesia, and so on. It is also around this time in the 1960s, as our panelists will discuss in more depth, that Chinatown really becomes much more politically active in the city. In 1966, there was a proposal for a very expansive Vine Street Expressway, which in many ways is a catalyst for a Save Chinatown coalition, leading to the creation of many organizations that are still with us today. All of these photos, except for the bottom right from the 1970s. One of our panelists is in one of these photos as well. And since then, since the fight over the Vine Street Expressway in the 1970s, there have been several other fights, including a fight over, or not fight over, controversies over the building of the convention center, proposals for a federal prison, proposals for a baseball stadium on this very location in 12th and Vine, a proposal for a casino, and as we know, right, in 2022, a proposal for the NBA, the Philadelphia 76ers arena, which would be roughly in this location, right? It would affect many neighborhoods, not just Chinatown, but for instance, Washington Square West. So the last thing I'll leave you with is, this is just my brief attempt to scrape the Philadelphia Inquirer timeline or archives for a timeline of the controversy up to today, from June 22nd, June 2022 to the present. You can see it's controversial, right? Roughly color-coded, right? Those who are for, those who are against the stadium. This isn't to say it's a 50-50 proposition. Most of us are aware. Surveys suggest it's quite one-sided. But I thought this would be a good kind of foundation so that we all kind of know the basic dates and that's okay, so from here we have Domenic speaking first, then Mary, and then Inga.
Thank you so much, and thanks for hosting us. Yeah, so I'm, as you said, a historian and a planner. Since 2010, I've had the real pleasure of working with colleagues in the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, a national civil rights law organization based in New York, and with colleagues in the downtown East Coast historic Chinatowns that survive. In Boston, where we work with the Chinese Progressive Association, Manhattan, and in Philadelphia, where Asian Americans United, which Mary founded, is our main partner. And if you're not aware, Asian Americans United is also really the core organization in the Save Chinatown Coalition. And you teed us up, or teed me up wonderfully, because I really have one big point to make, which is that history that you just related about Philadelphia's Chinatown is the history of Chinatowns writ large. Right? And when I say Chinatowns, I'm talking about the downtown historic Chinatowns that formed at the end of the 19th century as people fled, people from China fled to cities for safety after the transcontinental railroads in both Canada and the United States, which you see right there, were finished in 1872. People from China experienced a tremendous wave of violence, right, by white workers, right, who were afraid and accusing people of trying to steal their jobs, right? So Chinatowns exist for people's safety, and subsequently, right, because they were forced to be where they are by initially, right, some of what in my profession of city planning we call some of the very first sort of zoning laws in the 1870s, initially in California, and then repeated by cities across the United States, that essentially forced Chinese people and their bodies and the businesses where they worked and that they operated, especially laundries, but not only, to be in only certain places, right? So Chinatowns historically exist because they were forcibly segregated and because people sought safety. And I think that's important to start any conversation about the downtown, historic Chinatowns, for understanding their origins. From the point that they formed in the 1870s and 80s across the United States, Chinatowns have been targeted for destruction. And initially, in the late 19th century, it looks like the sort of image in Denver, if you can read that, as white mobs invade people's neighborhoods, pull people out of their homes, beat them up, sometimes lynch them, burn their houses. By right about 1900, the state gets involved heavily. Right? And so in many ways, the history of my profession of city planning is deeply tied up for the last 124 years or so in attempting to destroy Chinatowns. First, 100, 120 years ago, with city beautiful boulevards and civic centers, with public buildings. Later, after World War II, in history you also referenced, right, with highways and stadiums and arenas, new city halls, hospitals, right? And what am I leaving out? Los Angeles, right? Its initial Chinatown was destroyed by Union Station, the train station. I left out a mall or two in Victoria, Canada, also down the street here, right? And this is just such a widely shared history that is not unique in many ways to Chinatowns. Right? If you know the histories of working class communities, especially working class communities of color, their experiences, especially of post-World War II urban renewal and highway building, right? In large part, this is a shared history. But Chinatowns are downtown, again, forced to be where they are, and exist in a somewhat different landmark, right, than most neighborhoods that have experienced urban renewal. They exist, in many ways, as a sort of bigger target of downtown development or edge of downtown development. You see multiple stadiums and arenas in slides, right? But maybe not when you know yet. And Philadelphia, of course, has shares this history across the 20th century. Now, this doesn't just start with the Vine Street Expressway in the 1960s. The Vine Street Expressway is imagined in 1930, and that quote at the upper right of the mayor championing this project and imagining, urging the widening of Grace and Vine Streets after the Ben Franklin Bridge is built, opens in 1926, right, and the raising of Chinatown as a later desired step, right. You can go in the early 20th century and find in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, right, the mainstream press, celebrations of these plans for the promise that they will wipe out Chinatowns. I can go on about the details of this. I think Mary will fill in a lot of this, right? But in so many ways, you see Philadelphia's Chinatown surrounded by and just repeated projects, some of which you see in plans that were not built. And I want to stress to you just one or two more points. First, in Philadelphia and every other Chinatown that survives, because so many don't. Right? I said I work in downtown Chinatowns that survive on the East Coast, because Providence, Rhode Island, Baltimore, Maryland, Pittsburgh, PA, Washington, D.C. do not survive as functioning real Chinatowns anymore. And the first three don't. You can't even find a building. But Chinatowns in Philadelphia and across the United States and Canada, those that survive because people have continuously protected and rebuilt and preserved them. I share this image not just because it's the one that I think offends my Asian American colleagues the most, but also because it really, I think visually helps call into question something that I think is, not the same for everybody. what does it mean to preserve Chinatown? I think the answer for you or for someone in City Hall or a downtown development agency or somewhere else, right? I think the answer is different to different people. And I think it's different to different classes of Asian Americans by social class. Right? We've seen that before, right? In the Chinatown that I just said, right, isn't real, right? Isn't a functioning enclave for people to live in, right? And Asian or really other people. It's pretty dead neighborhood. I think it's really important to recognize that as we expect debates over potential mitigation, right, for what could we do to preserve Chinatown if the city approves an arena at 10th and Market, right? I think, to me, Washington, D.C., and frankly many other places, right, have been incredibly sober and cautionary tale that we can make a lot of investments in making a place look like Chinatown, but strip away all of its living functions as a neighborhood. And I guess the last thing I'll leave you with is that Philadelphia has a really vibrant, lively Chinatown today. It's a place where people can live in a range of affordable to less affordable housing. It accommodates a wide range of generations, and like other Chinatowns, is a pan-Asian space today. It's also a place where don't take a picture of that map or share it. It's inaccurate. And there's going to be more blue on there, actually, that shows Asian ownership. I'm really struck. This is what I studied in Philadelphia and Boston and New York Chinatown, especially its land use and who owns property. And this sort of image, frankly, and that's spread of Asian ownership is one thing that actually gives me a little bit of hope for the preservation of our Chinatown. I'll leave it there to my wonderful colleague, Mary.
Just a quick request from the live stream audience, if you could speak directly into the microphone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Yee, and I've been in Philadelphia since the 1970s. I came here as a graduate student to participate in the program in which Domenic teaches, the Master's of City Planning at the University of Pennsylvania. So I came from Boston, where as a middle school student, I experienced the destruction of more than half of the housing in my community. And because of that, the community dispersed to various smaller suburbs and neighborhoods in Boston. So I knew firsthand what could happen with a highway. So it was what we call the Southeast Expressway in Boston that took down all of Hudson Street and some of the other smaller streets around. In any case, I'm going to give you more or less a synoptic view of what has happened to Chinatown because the story is long and very complicated. But first of all, I just want to say that I came here and I was part of Yellow Seeds, which was one of the first progressive Asian American organizations on the East Coast. And basically, we felt that there needed to be a progressive voice in Philadelphia. At that time, in the 1970s, those of you who are around might remember that there's a lot of fervor in this country. We're still dealing with the aftermath of the Vietnam War. There was a lot of work being done in the Black community. The Black nationalist movement was strong. The Puerto Rican liberation movement was strong. And the Asian American movement was just beginning, really, to get on its feet. So a number of us gathered here in Philadelphia. Most of us were actually grad students at Penn, and some people who were undergrads in the Urban Studies program, and some of the high school students that were around. So what you see here is basically on the left-hand side, one of the things that really moved us to become politically active in Chinatown, and also to coalesce with the Philadelphia China Development Corporation and all the other institutions here. So as you see in that picture, and some of you have seen this many times, we could see with the Vine Street Expressway and the two ramps that were proposed, as well as on the bottom side, the 4 parking garages, actually 5 parking garages proposed for Market Street East, that Chinatown was basically going to be strangled. So this is one of the things we said, there's going to be a noose around Chinatown. So Yellow Seeds was one of the, actually, few organizations that had bilingual media. So on the other side, you see the Yellow Seeds newspaper, which came out rather infrequently and intermittently, but did supply the community with bilingual news. So it was only through this newspaper that the restaurant workers and the owners and people in the shops and so forth and residents understood what was going on with the Vine Street Expressway. Unfortunately, at that time, PCDC did not have any bilingual staff, and most of the second generation Asian Americans there did not speak Chinese. But those of us who came from Boston, Queens, Sacramento, and other places had grown up in bilingual families, and so we were much more adept at making ties with the regular working people here in Chinatown. So the first thing was that, as Domenic mentioned, in 1966, the community first understood that land was going to be condemned and a lot of their properties were going to be taken. And so when we were here in 1970, began Yellow Seeds around 1971, we basically became involved with PCDC. Since I was a planning student and my colleague Howard Chin, who was an architect at Lucan Studio, and we had people in urban studies, we all got involved. And because some of us had also been involved in progressive movements on our campuses, we had a much broader view of what this struggle meant, because we saw it in the context of the struggle of people of color, or, well, basically at that time we would say, minority folks across the whole country. And it also was an issue for us of democratic rights, because we were not being given a voice in determining the future of our community. So here you see the headline from Yellow Seeds, Community Halts Cranes. So we basically took the bureaucratic route and tried to go through city agencies and state agencies to try to combat the expressway. The expressway was going to take down the Holy Redeemer Church and School, which is the focal point of the community. It was the only community space where you could have a basketball game, you could have a wedding, a funeral, a wake, whatever, and it had the only outdoor playground of any size. So there was a lot of community loyalty to that, and despite that, the Catholic Church did not support the struggle against the Vine Street Expressway. In fact, because it was a mission school and they were losing money, they were willing to let it go. So it took a lot of fight to actually turn that around. Let's see. So the thing is, I want to say what this struggle against the Vine Street Expressway extension did was to develop the leadership and community organizing skills of the Yellow Seeds young people, and also develop the grassroots leadership within the Philadelphia Chinatown Development Corporation. The older generation here was not used to being confrontational, so that was one of the things you could say that Yellow Seeds helped with. So we were kind of the loyal opposition. We often criticized PCDC in our newsletter because we thought that they did not take an aggressive enough stance against some of the government agencies. So I think I'm going to move ahead a little bit here. Oops, sorry, wrong way. Okay. So Chinatown is going to be set by a large number of infrastructure projects that have been government supported. Okay. So you see Chinatown in the red. That was kind of the core of Chinatown around 1970. And then the larger red area is more or less what the core is today. So what you see here is, okay, first of all, after the Vine Street Expressway was finished, which was not until 1990, okay, 10 years later, the Phillies proposed a stadium, which you see there on the upper left. The stadium would have been right here, where we are right now. This building would not exist if that stadium had been constructed. So the issues at that time are similar to the issues today, issues around traffic and parking, around the economic impact on small businesses, on property values, and on rents and residences. So at that time, John Street was the mayor, and unfortunately, this is what happened. So the Crane Center that got built with the community center, that's something that we had been lobbying for since probably the late 1990s, right? And that was in the capital budget. But once the community opposed the Philly Stadium, that got taken out, that line item got taken out of the capital budget. So luckily, because of the traffic issues, the Phillies themselves decided to go to South Philly. So that was good. So I have here also on the list, 1964 Independence Mall 4. So that was the whole half block along 9th Street. Now it's occupied by relatively new construction, and much of that actually was to be replacement housing and commercial for the convention center, which you see there in black. And the convention center was done in 2 phases, so half of that was the second phase. And so at that time, people said, well, how come you didn't fight the convention center? Well, we did fight it to a certain extent. We were offered basically a replacement housing for the families, and that was on 9th Street. However, they also offered the merchants the ability to cater there, and they offered promotion. That never happened. But, we had just finished fighting Vine Street, so there's a certain amount of battle fatigue as well that happened. Okay. So you remember in the other graphic, there were the 4 or 5 parking garages on the south side of Chinatown from Market Street East. So Market Street East was a real controversy overall because it also took community block grant funds from HUD, which was supposed to be for neighborhood housing, and used it for the gallery. So we protested that, and what we got was not much. So what we got was the promise actually for some urban design, signage, and banners leading from Market Street to 10th and Arch. Okay. So that never happened either. So moving on, 1984, the commuter rail tunnel. The commuter rail tunnel was to connect basically the Reading line with the other line that's at 30th Street Station. And what happened with that significantly in the community was that Cecilia Yip, who was a very important and strong leader of the community, lived on one of these blocks at a further end at 9th and Race. And she refused to move, so she was the only one with a building still standing on that block. And something happened with excavation and her house caught fire. And so she had to evacuate. And so in order to agree to give up her house, and because she was such a public figure, we were able to get subsidized housing. So we were able to get some 235, 236 housing, and eventually Section 8 housing. Okay, so let's see, I skipped over, okay, I said something about the convention center. Okay, the federal prison, okay, in the upper right, okay, was planned for, well, eventually ended up at 7th and Arch, but was planned right there where PCDC has its 1-story building. And one of the issues that also helped get this moved was that the African American Museum felt that it was really an insult to have the prison near the museum. So, okay, Philly Stadium happened in 2000, and then 2000, sorry, I'm not in chronological order. And 2008, okay, we were then threatened again by the Foxwoods Casino. So one of the issues with the Foxwoods Casino happens to be that for Asians, pathological gambling, that is addictive gambling, is something that there's a predisposition for. So when there were public meetings here, practically everybody had someone either in their family or that they knew that had basically succumbed to pathological gambling. So there are many stories about families that were broken, people who lost jobs, lost their homes, and so there was a big outcry from a lot of the business owners here who said, we don't want this near us because we can't depend on our workers then coming to work every day. so all this on the map gives you an idea of some of the things that have really crossed our paths. So today we're confronting the arena, which proposes to bring for game day 18,500 people. And as I mentioned, the same issues that basically attended the Philly Stadium attend today for the Phillies proposal. And one of the issues here is that we feel as a community, we have been discriminated against over and over again by these projects. So there's a pattern here. So I would say that one of the things that's been strong about Philadelphia Chinatown is that a lot of us who were here in 1970 or 1980 or 85 when AAU was founded are still here. And so some of the relationships we have with other communities basically still exist, but also our knowledge of strategy and tactics and different ways that we are able to subvert some of these projects is also still with us. And so those of us who've been here are basically passing down some of this knowledge to the succeeding generations in our community. So I think last year, the National Trust for Historic Preservation named Philadelphia and Seattle among the 11 most, or 13, most endangered sites in the U.S. We are lucky in that we are one of the few Chinatowns that is thriving and still existing. And as Domenic said, definitions of community or definitions of preservation vary. And this has always been one of the issues. And this has been an issue with Councilman Squilla, who said that he would side with our community if we were against the arena. And so PCDC did a lot of work to substantiate that 93% of folks here were against the arena. And then Squilla said, well, I didn't mean community just Chinatown. I meant the larger community, including other neighborhoods in Center City. Well, anyhow, that is an issue. It's always an issue of basic definitions and language being co-opted by different sides who have different positions. So I just wanted to close by saying that the fact that Chinatown is still here is a testimony to the resilience of immigrant folks and also a symbol of resistance to white racism. Okay. And so I think that all of us who want to work for social justice basically can join our cause. It's a righteous cause. And so I hope that you will support us. So I'm going to now pass this on to Inga. He's going to give us a view of the history of Market Street.
Hi, I'm Inga Saffron, and I'm the architecture critic at the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thank you, Mary and Domenic. That was a great contextualization of the history, and I learned a lot that I didn't know. So thank you. So since you did such a good job of talking about the history of Chinatown, I thought I would widen the lens a bit. Okay. I thought I would widen the lens a bit and talk about what happens to East Market Street, which is kind of this border, you could call it, between Chinatown, Center City, and those are always tricky places. So a little bit of history. East Market is literally where Philadelphia began. It's the city's main street, and as such, it belongs to the whole city. That's my belief. And the way people experience Market Street is different, of course, depending on whether they live next door to Market Street or whether they come in to shop or work or dine or seek health care. But Market Street is this place that almost every Philadelphian knows. And some people think we spend too much time worrying about our downtown. But as I wrote in a recent column, we need to be concerned about the health of Center City because it represents a big chunk of Philadelphia's economy. And Market Street is really the center of Center City. So you know, we can't just be oblivious to what happens in Center City. You probably heard the story that William Penn stepped off the boat at Dock Street, which is where the Society Hill Towers are located. And that's apparently true, but the very first permanent wharves in Philadelphia were built literally at the foot of Market Street. And the street quickly developed into this main commercial and residential thoroughfare. You can see those red dots going up the picture, how businesses gravitated to Market Street. It was where the first produce market was located, the first merchants exchange, the first courthouse, the city's first successful newspaper, which was run by Ben Franklin, and it was located at 2nd and Market Street. Ben Franklin famously got off the boat at the foot of Market Street. He walked up Market Street. You probably heard the story of him buying 2 loaves of bread and putting them under his arms, and a woman laughed at him, and then, later he ended up marrying her. But anyway, so he, the first newspaper was at 2nd and Market Street, and that later became a center of newspapers in Philadelphia. It was known as Printing House Square. The prototype for the White House in Washington, what we today call the President's House, was located at 6th and Market. And because it was the city's main street, Market Street was where merchants built their stores. It wasn't on Walnut Street, it wasn't on Chestnut Street. Those were residential streets. And those early shops that prospered on Market Street, and by the early 20th century, they had really evolved into lavish retail emporiums. These great department stores did not exist in isolation. They were part of a larger ecosystem that included small apparel manufacturers. They were often on Filbert Street or south of Market Street. And in those little factories, people would sew the clothes and then put them on racks and literally wheel them over to the department stores. And they would be sold. Sadly, that world doesn't exist anymore. Market Street was also home to theaters, hotels, newspaper offices, and buildings of various architectural styles and sizes. As you can see in this early 20th century photo, this is just about 11th and Market Street, where the arena is proposed. This is what it looked like in the early part of the century, early 20th century. And of course, the city's underground subway was built to serve all these businesses, and it traces Market Street's path. This was really, the whole city evolved from Market Street. But once residents started moving to the suburbs after World War II, the street's big department stores really began to suffer. And to compete with the suburban malls and their big parking lots, the cities and the store owners came up with a plan to modernize Market Street. In the mid-70s, they demolished several great department stores, including Gibbons at 8th and Market. And then they built this 3-block long indoor shopping mall, which was originally called the Gallery. It was the first downtown mall in America, and the inspiration for dozens of gallerias and galleries around the country. Back then, the city planners believed that the Gallery would be a regional destination that would convince suburbanites to come back into downtown and shop. And as part of that mall's construction, the city reorganized the regional rail system underground. What Mary talked about, the commuter's tunnel. They put several of the regional rail lines underground. And they also created what we now call Jefferson Station. At the same time, you also heard how they built 676 on the northern border of Chinatown. And all these things, all these transportation modes were intended to serve the gallery. You know, people could come in by transit, they could come in by the road. And the 8th Street exit of 676 was intended to be, quote, the gateway to the mall. And you might know there's this big parking garage at 8th Street, 8th and Arch, that straddles 8th Street, and that was the gateway garage. And the city had this whole idea that all these suburbanites were going to come in, drive on 676, get off, go to the gallery. And you also heard from Mary how much of Filbert Street was demolished. And there's another very large, or at least two large garages on Filbert Street that were also meant to serve the mall. And then, of course, between those garages and the construction of the convention center, they were like a wall around Chinatown, 676. So on three sides, Chinatown effectively walled off. The gallery never did really succeed in prying those shoppers away from the big suburban malls, but I would argue that it was not a complete failure because it was so easy to get to the mall on transit. The gallery became the main shopping destination for Philadelphia's neighborhoods, especially those that didn't have their own local shops. It served people who didn't own cars and didn't have credit cards. The mall was an aspirational place for Philadelphians of modest means, including Chinatown residents. The sociologist Elijah Anderson considers the gallery as part of what he calls the cosmopolitan canopy, which was a neutral ground where people of different races and classes come together in a shared experience. And, you know, for all the bad things that have been said about what we now call the fashion district, it actually does still serve that role. So, of course, a lot of mistakes were made with its design. Even though the gallery is, you know, in an urban setting, it was designed to replicate a suburban, inward-facing suburban mall. And, you know, suburban malls are typically surrounded by parking lots. This one was surrounded by garages. But also, you know, the facade originally was really solid. There were no shop windows that we expect to see in an urban environment. There are very few entry points. You know, after the initial excitement of having a downtown shopping mall wore off, it became a very uninviting place, very fortressy. And then it really started to struggle after 2010 with the advent of online shopping and the retail apocalypse that has resulted from that. It's been really hard for retail, not just in Philadelphia, but in all cities. So in 2015, the owners of the gallery decided they were going to do a major renovation. They were going to correct a lot of design flaws. They were going to open up the facade, put in store windows, put in entry points. And, you know, there are problems with that design, but, you know, it was really, in a way, kind of heroic because now there actually are outward-facing stores, there are windows, and just as they finished that in 2019, we had the beginning of the pandemic. And then, they really, business really suffered. And so the mall has gone through really hard times. The original owner has gone bankrupt. It's been taken over by an out-of-town owner, which is not a good thing. You hear a lot of people who support the arena say, oh, this is a dying mall, nobody goes there. And I just want to push back against that narrative because it is 79% occupied. According to the Center City District, retail in Center City is 85% occupied right now. Not that big a difference. And I would also say that it still has the largest concentration of retail chains in Philadelphia. There's Primark, Sephora, Kate Spade, H&M, Levi's. My husband is a devotee of the Levi's store. I wouldn't say he's single-handedly keeping them in business, but he has a lot of jeans at Levi's. There's a Nike store, among others. I actually have a name for this called retail othering, or real estate othering, because so many people don't shop at the fashion district, they think nobody goes there. But, I think that is not true. But, we can't deny that, retail is in trouble, Market Street's in trouble, every shopping street in Center City is in trouble. So, yes, there are shoppers there, but, it's a fair question to ask, are there enough shoppers to sustain Market Street as a traditional retail destination? And if the answer is no, then we have to ask, what do we want our Market Street to become instead? Should it be an entertainment district? Should it be a residential boulevard with tall buildings, with some kind of ground floor retail? Something like East Market, the East Market development, which is across the street on the south side, which is a wonderful redevelopment. It doesn't really get enough credit, but, they took a pretty bad bunch of buildings, and they put 2 apartment buildings there, a hotel, an office building, a supermarket. There's retail. They just built a very nice Jefferson Hospital building there. It's a great mix of uses. Could we have that on other parts of Market Street? And the really unfortunate thing about the Sixers' proposal is that it's really shut down the conversation of what we want Market Street to be. And now we're presented with this very unappealing binary, take the arena or let Market Street die. And apart from all the other problems with the arena proposal, I actually believe there's very little evidence that the arena, which would be dark 200 nights a year, will cure what ails Market Street. For more than half a century, we've been making these really monumental decisions based on a wish and a prayer. And I really feel before we make another decision that will be with us for a generation, that we really need to undertake an independent, community-based planning study and bring everyone together and talk about what we want to see on Market Street, how we envision its future, what would be successful. This is the street that made us Philadelphia in the 18th century, and we wanted to reflect who we are today, 300 years later. So, thank you.
Thanks so much to our 3 panelists. We have 30 minutes for questions and so on. So if there's any questions out there, or begin to think of your question through a second microphone. In the meantime, I thought I would begin with one question of my own. And when we were preparing this panel, we were thinking, we don't want to be too much just preaching to the choir. Maybe we should get the Sixers' perspective on this. And they're a little busy now, but maybe in a week they would actually have free time to talk a little bit more. But for now, I thought I would kind of play devil's advocate and at least bring up the fact that they have made certain promises about what the arena would bring with us. So I would kind of thought I would kind of ask the panel to maybe reflect on some of these promises. These are just like screenshots from their website for the Sixers Arena. Maybe you've probably seen this before. Without going into the details or making us read the whole text, just some top line statistics, right? That they promised that the new arena would bring in $200 million to the school district, $800 million for the city. They're talking about a $50 million community benefits agreement, which could be used on many things, such as parking and traffic control, clean, safe services, and so on and so forth. And this is obviously their big argument, right, for how this is not just something that would benefit a private basketball team, but the whole city. So I guess the question I want to just kind of throw to the panel is, what do we make of these figures? What do we make of these promises? And is there anything from a historical perspective, from a comparative perspective, that might kind of shed some light on, illuminate how we should think about some of these promises? So if anyone, any of the panelists want to step up?
Well, I want to say that, there have been numerous studies by sports economists that will refute these claims that the 76ers have made. So there have been arenas, built all across the country, some of them inside the city, sometimes on the edges and so forth. But overall, sports venues are not an economic development strategy. And Domenic has also spoken about this, especially in terms of like employment and in terms of the community benefits agreement, the $50 million over 30 years really doesn't amount to much, for one thing. And also, there's a history of community benefits agreements not really benefiting the community. The ones that have had some traction have been very difficult to enforce. Okay? I have a colleague in LA who has been working with one of the community benefits agreements there. And also the jobs that are being promised are low-wage jobs. Most of them are temporary. The full-time equivalents are really much fewer than what they're saying here. The other thing is that in terms of, say, multiplier effects for spending at the arenas, it's little to nothing, because basically what's happening is that there's a substitution effect, that people who are going to the games there would have gone to the games if they were in South Philly. It's not additional spending. Only when there are big events, such as there is a, NBA playoff, there might be some multiplier effect temporarily for some large event like that when you have outsiders coming in. But there are very detailed and substantiated studies that really say that the arenas are basically not going to benefit the city. And usually what happens, and one reason why the Sixers are saying they are not taking any city money is because the history has been that municipalities and states have really funded a lot of these other arenas, okay? But they've never gotten the payback. And so recently you might have read about Potomac Yards in DC, because the Capital One Arena, which is in DC's Chinatown, right, basically was going to be abandoned by the Wizards and all. But they tried to move to Virginia, and Virginia refused to give them the money they demanded for a new arena. So now they're back in DC, and the mayor promised something like $500 million, right, to keep them in the city. So we'll see how that works out. But I want to let Domenic also chime in on this, because he has done a lot of work around it.
Sure. Mary, was it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, Mary attended the Sports Economists National Conference. We together have learned way more than I ever wanted to know about booking and arena finance, and particularly the tax benefits, right, or the tax payoffs. the sort of claim that you just voiced promised. I'm going to be a little more blunt than Mary and say that there's really two kinds of literature about the impacts of arenas and stadiums. One is produced by consulting firms hired by teams and by cities, and the other is by independent academic economists. And the independent academic economists all agree. There's a complete consensus that cities like Philadelphia can't afford to have two arenas that are both profitable. Okay. New York has 4 arenas. Only one of them is profitable, Madison Square Garden. The others are all losing money. Okay. And New York is a very different market, able to support much more than Philadelphia can. I can go on and on about this, how much time you have, but I'll just also stress that the why don't arenas add to your economy. It's because of something that the independent academic economists measure, and this is why for them there's not tax benefits, right? But that teams and cities do not measure, and that we, for a good year, I think, have repeatedly asked Philadelphia city government to measure, but they have repeatedly, our city leaders and bureaucrats have repeatedly refused, which is any potential costs to area businesses in Chinatown and Washington Square West and other surroundings, right, that would happen, have been completely off limits to count. And so if you count the costs, as one of our colleagues who's a professor of real estate, Arthur Ackerman, came out, it was publicized in the Inquirer maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago. Right, if you actually count what the potential costs could be in a very conservative way, the job losses and the losses of business to area, mainly small businesses, right, would essentially wash out, would essentially cancel out any activity, sort of economic activity that an arena brings. But that doesn't address what the economic activity that arena would take away from South Philadelphia. Okay? That would mean actually ultimately real losses, tax losses for Philadelphia. I think if you add all of that up, we can go on.
I just wanted to say that money cannot always be the primary metric, right? Because we're talking about Chinatown as an ethnic community, as a cultural and spiritual center for the Asian Americans in Delaware Valley. So this is one of the issues, too, that everything's being measured by the almighty dollar.
But in a way that's completely, I think dishonest, right? I agree with you completely. There are things to, other things to value, but economically, right, this doesn't add up. Even economically, it doesn't add up, which is, I think, one of the only reasons we're being asked to support it.
Right.
Except that we feel good about it.
Well, we're being asked to support it because, all these numbers that the Sixers have come up with, which are not tested. I mean, they just pull them out of a hat. In my career of covering large projects, I always hear how there could be 12,000 jobs. Well, we would be a lot better off as a city if there really were 12,000 jobs. And just to build on the point that both of you made, there's already an arena in South Philly, and they are double counting because if they really are active 150 nights a year, which is what they say, those are 150 nights that won't be active in South Philly. So we're reducing the value of something we already have. And, the people who work the people who would work in this Sixers arena, they're already working in South Philly. Or if there were 2 arenas, they'd be, commuting between the 2 of them. So I really feel like these numbers are exaggerated. And I think it is a really good point what economic activity in Chinatown will be lost, and it's really a shame that there's not an economic impact of Chinatown's value And how does that compare? Because I think if we did look at that, if we could, if we could quantify that, we would see it's the same or greater as these numbers.
We should see to the audience if there's any questions. Is there a microphone?
Hi, I think my microphone is on. My name's Kate. There's a video going around the internet in Philadelphia today showing Brian Squilla saying that he would override community sentiment of 75% against the arena by giving people a community benefit package, and that in the casino instance, 100% of the community was against that, and he still managed to get it through. I don't really understand much about him or why he is so supportive of this, but what are the political options that people in this room have to try and support this community, in addition to calling him, which doesn't seem to be his priority?
So the reason that Mark Squilla is so important is because this arena site is in his district. And the site is actually zoned pretty much to allow this building. There's very modest zoning changes that are needed. But the real thing that the Sixers need an approval for is the closure of Filbert Street. It's called striking the street. And that is typically, when a street is struck, and usually they're like little alleys somewhere, and, you know, that nobody uses and the city doesn't want to plow them, and the city strikes the street. Filbert Street's a pretty big thoroughfare, and they would need to shut it off, between 10th and 11th, and the way to do that is to have a bill introduced into council by the district council person. And some of you may have heard of this practice in Philadelphia called councilmanic prerogative. And the way it works is if one district council person introduces a bill that impacts their district, everybody votes in lockstep. And they don't question it because they're afraid when they want something in their district, they want everyone to approve it. But I would say there's some new faces on council, and some of them are quite progressive. And
Kendra
Rue Landau, maybe. I mean, I'm not sure, how far they'll go, but, the question was asked, what can be done politically? So I would just point out that, it's not just important to lobby Squilla, it's important to work with these other people, because there's nothing to stop them from voting against it.
Right.
So that's what I would say.
I saw some other hands. Yeah, Whitney.
Hi, thank you so much for this panel. My name's Whitney. I have a historical question. I hope that's okay. Mary, I teach Yellow Seeds in my history class. I'm a historian at Villanova. It's so great to hear from you tonight. I was really struck by, if I understood you correctly, that when you came to Philadelphia, that you said you and many second-generation Chinese American graduate students spoke Chinese and had really like a cultural connection with recent migrants. And it sounded like maybe second-generation residents of Philadelphia or Chinatown didn't have that cultural connection. And I'm just curious if you could reflect on that, if that's a cultural difference of Philadelphia's Chinatown, or if you saw a particular generational difference when you moved to the city. And maybe related to that, I'm curious about that property ownership map that you put up, even though you said I know it wasn't accurate, Domenic. But I'm just curious about the change over generations of Asian Americans who own property versus Asian Americans who may live or work in Chinatown. Like, how has that changed over the generations in terms of like property ownership, residence, where one earns one's livelihood? So anything that strikes anyone, feel free to answer. Thank you.
Well, it was interesting to me when I came to Philadelphia that a lot of the second generation Chinese Americans did not really speak Chinese at home totally. Okay. In Boston, we went to Chinese school after regular school, that kind of thing, and the other folks in Yellow Seeds also. And so it was interesting here, and part of the reason I think is that, well, let's see, there were a lot of mixed race families here in Philadelphia, Chinatown when I first arrived. So that might account for some of it. And the other thing could be, just as in a lot of immigrant communities, you know, the parents want the children to be really Americanized. And so I think that was certainly something that was operative here too. It was really surprising to me, to be honest. And I think that for some of the working class families that were in the restaurant business, it's more likely that their kids spoke some Chinese, but I really can't, I never really looked into it too much. I just made that observation. So I will pass it on to Domenic to talk about property.
Sure. No, thanks. So, colleagues in the Save Chinatown Coalition and I have given a number of tours for, you know, people who work in City Hall or downtown development offices or, you know, other institutions. And we were giving a tour. I think it was for the general manager of the Reading Terminal and the head of the Merchants Association of Chinatown. And they turned to us and said, "Well, when was the height of Philadelphia's Chinatown?" Because all of us, you know, for very good reasons, we talk about the history of Philadelphia and other, you know, downtown Chinatowns as a history of destruction and struggles to preserve something, right? And we said, well, turn to each other at this point and said, well, today is the height of Philadelphia's Chinatown in terms of the number of Asian American residents, in terms of the number of Asian American businesses, in terms of property ownership, for sure. And I would just say that the boundary there on the right side is 9th Street. There's plenty of Asian ownership on the east side of that. And I've just recently bumped up the boundary right at the north side there. Here it's Green Street, just above Spring Garden. Now we're looking above to Fairmount and seeing lots of mostly Chinese surname owners. And lots of corporate owners too, actually. LLCs, limited liability corporations, and partnerships, right? That many of which go back to Asian owners. Those are often hard to figure out. But if you've heard a narrative about how, particularly those older Cantonese merchant and landlord sort of class folks who founded PCDC, right? If you've heard a narrative about how, you know, they you know, the sort of middle class of Philadelphia's Chinatown moved out to Cherry Hill, New Jersey at a certain point, and then, you know, later to Lower Merion, and to some extent, right? Yes, but the folks from Cherry Hill have been coming back and following their kids and grandkids and buying properties, you know, back in Philadelphia's Chinatown. But really, the big trend in ownership, you know, I think, and particularly the ownership north of Vine and north of Spring Garden, is the Fujianese immigrants who you know, came you know, to North America in the 1970s and 80s as very working class, sometimes, you know, without the status, right, and experienced a lot of, you know, exploitation and struggle, right, over time, have built wealth over time and pooled wealth and bought a lot of property. And I can go on about that, but I think that's really the biggest sort of group. And people have very strategically purchased property in a neighborhood that, you know, we've seen changing, you know, for a long time.
Thank you all for sharing that with all of us. I'm potentially making a little bit of a leap here, but thinking about the size and political power of department store magnates, say, compared to like the terrible trio of billionaires that own the 76ers and the other major player that we haven't talked about tonight, which is Comcast. I'm curious from a comparative perspective, as we've seen in more recent years, how corporate consolidation has really increased the power that each of these corporations has in government. If there are any lessons to be taken away from similar
oppositional scenarios in other cities. And then also maybe if anyone would be willing to speculate about why Comcast is so quiet right now.
I guess this is a question for me. That's an interesting analogy you made about the power of department store owners versus the power of the Sixers owners, and I think it, reflects sort of, the way capitalism has changed over the years. The department store owners were very powerful. Department stores were big business. These were giant stores. Like you can still see the Wanamaker's, which is now Macy's. It's a 12-story full block building. You could buy. It was the Amazon of its time. So these were really powerful people, and they were local people, and they were civic leaders. And when they got together to say, let's modernize Market Street's retail, they did it because they were Philadelphians and they wanted Market Street to thrive, even if they were misguided in the kind of building that resulted. I think if you look at the Sixers ownership, these are money guys, big money guys, and I don't believe they're from Philadelphia. David Edelman is, but the two guys with the really big money are not. They're not from here, and it doesn't. Market Street doesn't mean anything to them. So I think that's one of the differences. We really kind of lost those local civic-minded people. And your question about why is Comcast so quiet? Well, of course, they did release their own counterplan. I mean, there's an incredible PR war going on between these two entities. And I think one reason Comcast is working behind the scenes. I think that's why they're quiet. And I think they shouldn't be underestimated. They employ 8,000 people in Philadelphia, 12,000 in the greater Philadelphia area. And yes, the Sixers have a lot of money, but so does Comcast.
Not compared to Comcast.
In the larger context of things that we see is big money making public policy. That's what's happening, right? And so, as far as the bad actors go, Josh Harris is part of the group that is responsible for the closing of Hahnemann Hospital, right? Which basically deprived a lot of North Philadelphia of emergency services. So now Jefferson Hospital is the number one trauma center servicing all this large area. And this is an issue too in terms of the traffic patterns that would emerge should the arena be built.
Sure. I'll tell you a little history story. That plays off of what Inga was saying in particular. Does anybody remember the 76ers owner in the 1980s, Harold Katz? Yeah? Do you hate him still? Yeah? You hate him for trading Moses Malone, right? For a guy who never played a game for the Sixers. Yeah, Jeff Rowland, you were there, so okay. Harold Katz also, he would have been hated for something else had it gone through, because he made a deal with the governor of New Jersey, Christy Todd Whitman, with her administration back before the Spectrum was closed down and the Wells Fargo Center opened. He made a deal to bring the team to Camden. This is about more than 30 years ago. Right about that time, a company called Comcast bought into the Spectrum and a company called the Flyers, right? We created Comcast Spectacor. And they didn't like Harold Katz's plan, right? Because that was taking 40-some Sixers games away to Camden and threatening to take away concerts and other things. And so they went, Comcast, not Comcast, they went to the Whitman administration in Trenton and said, hey, look, that's what I said earlier, right? This Philadelphia regional market can't afford two arenas, right?
we got way more money than this Harold Katz guy. And he controls some basketball games, okay. But for every concert, every ice capade show, every circus, every other event that he's going to try to get into his arena, if you're putting up taxpayer dollars from New Jersey, residents for every other show, we're going to outbid him. And your arena is going to lose a ton of money. And I hope I'm telling a story about the future as well as the past. Yeah, sorry, he keep calling back to South Philadelphia. You got it.
Our savior's Comcast. Yeah. Peter.
Thank you all for your time. What does economic investment, property investment in Chinatown look like for the future? If it's not this, what is it? What's the way to do it? There's investment happening all around. Is it that? Is it a mix of the two? Or what does it look like? How do we make Chinatown great for the future?
So, I was starting to say earlier, right? Philadelphia Chinatown is as big and vibrant as it's ever been. One thing that really perplexes me about debates that we've had with people in the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation and our city's planning and development department, right, and our economic development leaders in the city, is that they tend to see Chinatown as a cultural treasure. That's a quote. But not a vibrant center of real estate and all sorts of economic activity. Right, that is not just confined within some set of blocks that are up here on the screen, but Chinatown is a regional center, not just of restaurants and grocery stores, right, but of hair salons and personal care, of professional services ranging from lawyers to accountants to Eastern and Western medicine to business services, from wholesaling for all sorts of businesses, especially the restaurant trade, and wholesaling not just of food, but also of materials, to business services that help people start other businesses. But I can just keep going on about the regional center, regional cultural and social center, but also regional economic center, and the engine of economic activity that our downtown Chinatown is. But you asked about real estate investment. I'm interested in mapping Asian people's ownership. If I mapped sort of big corporate owners, including real estate developers that are sort of famous in the real estate industry for being leading gentrifiers, the same firm that essentially were the successor firm to the firm that very strategically gentrified 13th Street, which we now call Midtown Village, also Soho in New York, South Beach in Miami, right? Big-time real estate investment. Right? There's sort of a swath along Spring Garden Street, and so it's between Spring Garden and mine, going east and west. Right? If my blue swath of Asian ownership is north-south, there's a big swath of big-time developers' interest and building, both new construction and conversion, some of which is probably reasonably compatible with Chinatown in that a lot of the marketing, right, to wealthy folks, right, who look like me, who might live there. I'm not young and hip enough, but artsy enough. But right, is marketing this space as a cosmopolitan place, right? That obviously Chinatown is providing. I can go on, but again, I think the level of Asian ownership and real estate investment that is not all for Asian residents or tenants. Some of it is actually sustaining the Central American community that depends on Fujianese-owned boarding houses, right, for affordable housing in this neighborhood. You may have noticed that I'm looking at the map, but it's that way, right? There is an important, enclave of Central American residents in downtown, and it's only affordable, right, because their Chinese landlords are keeping it affordable for them.
Maybe I'll just address another aspect of this, because you asked, what kind of investment should there be in Chinatown, and you probably heard that there's a proposal to cap part of 676, and I think it's a good idea because it would link the north and south parts of Chinatown, to knit them back together in a better way, create some green space, some park space. It would be a good thing in that regard, but we should keep in mind that there's a double-edged sword to anything like this, because it opens it up. It'll become a more desirable place. It opens up to gentrification. This is always a problem. You want investments in neighborhoods. You don't want to just leave them, to their own, just leave them to fall down. You want to invest in neighborhoods. You want to create parks and attractive spaces and reasons for people to go there. But, that inevitably, raises real estate values, create gentrification. And I think, even now we can start talking about what can be done to protect Chinatown, and I think there are perhaps some zoning changes, down zoning it, so that it's more difficult to build really big buildings. Perhaps it should be a historic district, which would add another layer of review. I'm not sure how the property owners would feel about that, but I'm sure there's some other ways to anticipate these changes. I mean, to be open-minded to these changes, because a lot of them can be good, but to do it in such a way that there's opportunities for community input.
I would say we might learn some lessons from Little Tokyo in Los Angeles, where the Little Tokyo Community Council has done a lot of work around acquiring properties into a community land trust. And also under California law, there is the opportunity to have a real estate investment fund, which would give you a decent return on your investment that can be used for such things as, in Little Tokyo, buying up more property and also subsidizing rents for legacy businesses. So there are other ideas out there in the world. And also in regard to historic preservation, what we're trying to investigate here is the possibility of a cultural historic district that is not so heavily focused on architectural significance. So that, again, would be another layer of protection we're hoping. Yeah. But in terms of economic investment in Chinatown, I think the issue is the economic investment in this block that the arena is being proposed for. If we could have development there that had affordable housing that allowed for expansion of retail from Chinatown as well as the Reading Terminal, that kept some of the entertainment that is popular right now in the fashion district, and that we could have 24-hour activity there, I think that would be an investment. So as people, in some of the surveys have been saying, we did a short survey around holiday time. They're saying that, the arena, this is not the Philadelphia that I love. This is not exactly the Philadelphia that I love. And so many people, we had 2,000 respondents to our survey. We only expected maybe 500 or so. And overwhelmingly, they expressed the desire to have mixed uses there that are community focused, that basically favor, local talent, local businesses, and also that are friendly to youth and also are sensitive to the homeless. So there are a lot of people here with a lot of compassion, a lot of good ideas too. And Domenic and his colleagues at Penn's Weitzman Design Center had a public workshop, also called a charrette, which was an intensive one-day brainstorming, I would call it, where we had design professionals as well as community folks and youth come together to figure out what alternatives there could be. And so there were some very exciting ideas, and those proposals are being refined, and we will have them around probably in a couple months anyway to share with people. So one of the things that was a critique of the city officials, the people at PIDC and the Planning Commission, was basically their lack of imagination, and also saying, as I think it pointed out, that looking at this as a binary, either you take this or you leave it and, you fall on our face. But really, I mean, the question is, why did the city not look at why Market Street East and the Fashion District failed? Why wouldn't they first analyze what was going on and then figure out what could be successful? So our answer to that is, well, we're doing your job.
Why don't we end with one final question? Is there any other questions out there? Yeah.
It was about 10 years ago that some friends of mine in Brooklyn were fighting against the Lepage Center, and there was a lot of activism around it. Obviously, they didn't win. And I guess my question to you is, do you think that the tides are turning against these big arena projects? We have the example of Virginia rejecting the arena coming to them. I feel like I'm reading a lot of news stories now where the debate around how many public dollars should be used towards these things are being questioned quite vocally. Is there a chance that we are entering a moment where cities might not be taking the bait for these promises? I guess, is there hope for us?
There's got to be hope.
There's a lot of sports projects going on right now in Salt Lake City. There's one, there's Dallas, Kansas City, I think Kansas, Los Angeles. They never stop because, these sports venues seem to have a lifespan of 30 years, and then people get tired of them. Like one Mary mentioned in D.C., it's only 30 years old, and the guy wants to leave. There's this competitive environment where one region is pitted against another, and people persist in thinking that this will be the pot at the end of the rainbow and make a lot of money for their region. So yeah, I think we're going to continue to see them. There is some, what happened in Alexandria where they rejected the idea of spending $500 million. That is heartening that someplace could reject it, but it's going to be a fight. I think every site is different, and I think this site is particularly bad. I think it's too small to accommodate the arena. It requires too many street closures, too many sort of engineering gymnastics. The idea of building over an active rail station, that's going to be really, really ugly. There's talk about building another arena in the sports complex. That's way different. And I think our sports complex doesn't get the respect it deserves. Yes, it's a big sea of parking, but it also has a subway. It's a transit accessible sports complex, putting them all the arenas together in one place. It's better than we give it credit for. The whole idea that these big boxes that are hardly used at all should be in our downtowns, I think that's a really bad way of thinking. I think we should learn our lessons about that.
We should end it there. We've gone over time, but let me thank the three panelists, thank the audience for coming out. Excellent questions tonight. Hopefully this has given us a lot to think about, a broader perspective on this. So yeah, thanks for coming out tonight.
We've got food, we've got handout, we've got t-shirts, please take a moment and grab one of those.
He said books is no longer. Yeah, I can say, I had to come down. It's a problem.
Yeah, it's gonna be 11, but I could just see it was pushed in there. It might still be pushed.
So who's supposed to teach her? Hi to Mr. Andy.